Thanks to our Patreon members for helping to make this episode possible, and we're now available on all the major podcasting platforms. You can find more information at the links below. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Capitalism Part 5, in which we explore where we've been, where we are, and where we're going with this capitalism stuff. And as I've mentioned, and today, it almost sounds like I'm making up history just to help make my point. And I'm trying not to make the logical fallacy of just circling that part of history that helps reinforce the ideas that I have about the function and development and expression of capitalism, because I think it is often misunderstood. And so, this just seems too convenient to be true, and yet the history I'm giving you is well known but rarely connected. So, but I do assure you that I'll try and ground this as broadly as possible, and also demonstrate that this doesn't just have retrospective power, but it has explicative power. It helps us understand things that otherwise are sometimes difficult to grasp. And so centrally, so far, I've said, look, what's happened, and this is, chicken and egg. This is cyclical. It's not one thing causes the other causes. These are things that evolve together, reinforce each other, and they grow, is you get this new conception of the individual as a property owning, free rights containing, Locke, Hume, Hobbes, Rousseau, all of this land of argument about this, but it shares this whole notion of a new sense of an isolated, independent individual who makes their free choices with their natural rights. At the same time, and related, you have a new finance system that requires private property, again, one of the natural rights, and that starts to break down the ties and the older systems that were in place and starts to create this new force in the world, the sort of corporate force, the merchant force, because there is this desperate drive to generate revenue on the parts of states. And so these start to become mutually reinforcing, and the ideas creates a new class of people who are thinking in new ways, so on and so forth. So we're developing both a new way of conceptualizing ourselves as individuals and how we relate to our communities, and at the same time, we're creating a new political power in the world that is focused financially, but it is in fact a political power that intervenes between rulers and the ruled, that is, it wants protections from the courts, that wants to have this third force in the universe that's going to not be subject to the whims and wills of the rulers and not be subject to incursions by other powers. And so it wants to defend itself with military or legal means, and wants to have access to resources and markets. And so all this is getting sorted out. And that's why I talked about the Dutch East Indies Company as this force that gets summoned up into the world. And once it's going, boy, does it go. And so, sort of the beginning, as you can see, of global economic expansion, of these new corporate powers in the world, so on and so forth. Now, what does this all add up to, and why does this give us any important explicative power at all? So one of the questions that people ask, and that historians have asked, and economics historians, is like, why Europe did it develop this sort of new economic system so quickly? And again, one of the reasons, not the only reasons, but one of the key reasons is that it had both this new conception of the individual and it had this desperate need for revenue because of this, hundreds of years of unending small and large-scale warfare that just drove this desperate need for finance. And that, again, the system just start reinforcing each other. And so how do you get more finance? They just kind of experimented around until they said, hey, this seems to work better. And it wasn't one answer, but it was this range that we now call the origins of capitalism. More private property, more free markets, more government support and protection of trade routes, and so on. So, but one of these questions rising out of this, besides that, which, why Europe? And then two is, how did the United States come to be the country that so completely and totally dominated this? Like what? What? Like how did this small colonial outpost in not even completely conquered North America come to just be the embodiment of this? Well, this really shouldn't be a question at all. I would argue, like one could say that that's a question that suggests paying no attention, but it's not how we tend to think of the history of the United States or of individuals or of capitalism in general. And if you ponder it from the direction that we've been going, first, many of the early colonies, Virginia, Plymouth, Massachusetts Bay Company, Newfoundland, not officially part of the United States now, New York, which was not called New York then, it was New Netherlands, were all founded, and this is the 1600s to, yes, I guess it's all in the 1600s, yeah. All in the 1600s, they were all founded as joint stock companies. So they were extensions of this new vision. Now, conquering countries, settling countries, overtaking people's... This goes back as far as recorded history, and the archaeological record suggests it was going on a long time before then. So this is not the first time people set out in the world and decided to take stuff from other people. Like, we were good at that. Humanity has been doing this for a very, very long time. However, this is really the first time again, I say that, excuse me, that this is really the first systematic expression of the function of these colonies is to go generate revenue. You are literally a revenue-generating corporation designed to make money for the investors and money for the sponsoring government, which was the Netherlands or England or whomever. Like, this is the entire purpose. It is not for the glory of the crown. It is not to increase the military strategic position. It is not to simply just as an example, in the ancient world, which did not have a growth view of economics. It had a stagnant view of economics. There's 100 gold pieces in the world, and we're just generally going to fight about who gets to divvy them up. So if we invade your country, what we tended to do, this is the old system, like the Romans, the Greeks to a certain extent, although they did found colonies, so slightly different in sometimes. You see this in Indian history, you see this in Chinese history. You have these big battles, blah, blah, blah. You kill their nobles, you put your nobles, and then you just keep doing the same stuff, right? You go, okay, look, they've got some farms. They're producing a lot of rice over there. Well, let's go kill those nobles, not the peasants, because you need the peasants to work the farms. You got to keep those people. Well, let's go kill the nobles, and then we'll take that land, and now the rice production is ours, so then we get it. This notion of saying, hey, we're going to go set up a colony in New England, and we think they've got good wood and fish resources that can be exploited for trade purpose to generate tax revenue for the crown. This will make us rich, and it will make the company that funds this rich. So it's not even being done directly as an extension of the government, although it is a quasi, again, these are all quasi. So you had these trade lords, literally called trade lords in England, who oversaw this. So they were quasi-government agencies who would back government-sponsored licenses that set up these companies that would then fund the settlements, and they would send people out. And so the people who are being sent out, the people who are governing these things, and the entire idea of these colonies is the new. This is the new vision. So often when colonies were founded before, people were like, oh, we're going to go take that city, and then we're going to put some people from here over there, and they'll take over those houses, and then those houses will be their houses, and that's all great. This is the notion of like, oh, we're going to go over there, set up a business. That business will employ people. The people who work there will often get paid. Some of them were slaves, some of them were indentured servants, some of them were actually getting paid. And the shareholders will get paid back, and the government will get paid back as part of taxes. So it'll be a win for everybody, except for the Native Americans, of course. But they don't count. And that concept of this new system, like, so you didn't used to ask your soldiers, hey, would you like to go fight? No, you ordered. If you were a dictator, if you were the head of these legions, it wasn't a question. You weren't asking them if they would like to participate. And when you got settlers, usually you were just saying, hey, we'll give you a piece of land, or we'll give you an opportunity to have a new house or something like this. But you weren't saying you're going to participate in a cash-making, money-generating, profit-driven, spinning of wealth. This was absurd. I mean, sometimes the army would go in, kill the natives, put a few governors in, and leave, and there would be no other representatives of Rome. Or there might be a handful, like 10 or 15, Roman citizens left in these major conquests, right? It wasn't about that. It was you're going to capture some revenue stream and you're going to take property and it's going to be great for all kinds of reasons. But it wasn't a joint stock company. It wasn't this outlook. And so part of the thing is the United States is founded legally, like these are legal documents, legal settlements. The whole structure of these early colonies are joint stock companies. Right? This is the outlook from the get-go for a big part of this. And the people who were working in them had the outlook of members of a joint stock company, right? They were here to farm profit, right? Like this was the point of the whole operation. How successful they were, what happened, there's all historical vagaries is going on. And so from the very inception, not all the colonies, there were other kinds of colonies, but a lot of the colonies had this incredibly powerful force. So if you look, Spain did not do it this way. Spain tended to set up colonies and as extensions of crown control and crown power more directly. So the Spanish vision is more the old vision where, you're setting up viceroys and royal officials to run the place, whereas many of the early colonies in the United States, not just the United States, but in sort of northern North America, they had sort of quasi-self-governing or moderately self-governing or just run by private governors who are representatives of the company. The notion that the individuals who were going could own land directly, right? Like you as one of the workers could go and own land, whereas usually you're sending viceroys, royal officials from Spain, viceroys, royal officials, and military people who are conquering land for the king, for the sovereign, for the crown. This is expansion of Spanish royal authority and power and control. This is not to give land. Of course, it ends up working this way anyway, but that's not directly the idea. And so even at the time, like the Spanish system versus the Dutch-English system are working very different. France was kind of somewhere in the middle, depending on where you are in their period of colonialism. So that key difference means an entire outlook, right, of, hey, do we want to just go over there, take gold, conquer land for the king, and be done with it? Or are we trying to set up colonies that are self-sufficient, generate money, and generate trade, operate functionally independently? That is the new thing in the world. And newish, I mean, not entirely new in the history of the planet, but very newish, particularly under this capitalism model. And so when America decides to declare independence, it's not as shocking because they were set up sort of as these independent entities that are supposed to be generating profit. They're supposed to be able to do this. So at the same time that these new colonies are being sent out and this new model is being developed, the British East India Company, which is very much like the Dutch East India Company, I think the British East India Company actually comes a couple of years earlier, like 1600-ish. Probably should look that up. But it's right around the same time as the Dutch East India Company. But it's the same idea. We're going to give you a monopoly on trade. We're going to give you trade routes. You go out, you make the investments, and hey presto, you'll make money, we'll make money, and everybody will be happy. And this worked for England to a shocking degree, so that by the time, if you look at around the outbreak of the Revolutionary War, like I said, which is an important moment for all of this, capitalism history stuff, is England is getting about 60 to 70% of its revenue from foreign trade. So it's basically a trade economy. At the same time, France is getting 20 to 30%-ish. I mean, it's all hard to calculate exactly. However, notice 20 to 30% is not insignificant. And so that's why when you roll into the Napoleonic War, it really is a global war. I mean, trade routes are being closed off, ports are being blockaded, the continental system is being put in effect to try to crush British trade and economic, right? So it is going on all over the world, the Napoleonic War. Some historians will say it's the first truly global war, is the Napoleonic War, because the trade and economic integration had become so significant through these corporations, right? This is what we're talking about. So why does this matter? So as the history, I mean, this will not come to any shock to any of my listeners, I'm sure. So you set up the British East India Company, it starts trading with India, it starts making a lot of money, and then, hey presto, it gets itself into all kinds of trouble. Financial mismanagement, embezzlement, governing problems, dubious patterns of action, et cetera, et cetera. And so what do you do? And this is why when people say, oh, capitalism is an economy and economic issue and politics is a political issue and those things shouldn't mix, right? This entirely misses the point. No, it's just another type of politics. So, of course, being too big to fail, the British East India Company does what all large companies have done throughout history, is they go to the government. And they're like, hey, we're having a little bit of trouble here. Could you bail us out? Now, also, I know this will come as not much of a shock to my listeners. About a third plus members of Parliament owned shares, and generally a lot of shares, in the British East India Company. And if the government didn't bail them out, they were going to lose a lot of money. This is not a coincidence, by the way. The fact that they had acquired, let's use a polite word, shares in this company, yes, talks about how well connected the company is and that their interests were aligned with the British government, et cetera, et cetera. And so promptly they received a very large bailout from the government, and they passed the Tea Act. And the Tea Act allowed them to trade tea directly with the United States. Well, not the United States then, yes, but the colonies. And of course, you may be familiar with the Tea Party, all this. This is all related, because what it did is it allowed the sale of basically really cheap tea in the United States, undercutting local markets and, generating extra taxes, et cetera, et cetera. So again, all of this is interrelated, but it is this corporate bailout that tried to give a market advantage so the British East India Company could sell tea directly into North America. Because no, British East India Company, why is it they get direct trade with North America? Because all these trade routes were regulated, usually as monopolies. And they said, oh, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to let you go directly to the Americas, and that way you'll be able to sell a bunch of this excess tea that you have on hand. You'll make some money, you'll pay a bunch of taxes, you'll get bailed out. Everybody's a winner, except for, of course, the colonists who are now being exploited. But these colonists, right, like again, Boston Tea Party, not that excited. And they were merchants and they were businessmen, and they did not think that the government had the right to dump all of this tea on their markets and undercut them and then try to charge them taxes on things, because that went against their natural rights. Basically, this is what they're saying. We're merchants, we're free individuals, and part of our natural rights is to control our markets. And the government's like, what are you talking about, control your markets? No, we're the government. We've given a trade monopoly to this company. They'll control your markets. And so when we talk about the American Revolution, one of the things we're talking about is the freedom to establish your own markets. Like, this is really, really core to the entire structure of the development of capitalism, particularly why America expresses capitalism so strongly and sort of just took this idea and ran with it. One, we were set up for it. Originally, this is like core into the whole DNA of the founding of the country. Two, the acts that the British government were taking to try and fund the various wars that they were involved in, primarily with France, led specifically to the need for revenue that they wanted to generate out of the colony. But this is specifically what the colony did not want to do, because they're like, no, now you're just taking our money and it's ours. You can't tax us without asking us to tax us. You can't tell us another part of this. You can't say we can't take the Native American land, what the government tried to do, because it's our right to take their land, which I love that notion that it's our right to take other people's lands. It's great. They don't really own it. That was the argument, right? They don't actually own the land because they aren't using it properly. So it's ours to take for free because they don't really own it. But once we take it, then we do own it. Then it falls under our proprietorship. This was literally the terms of the debate, by the way. It sounds like I'm exaggerating, but I'm not. This was, they don't really use the land in the way that allows them to claim ownership. So it's free to take, and if we farm it, then it's ours, and it passes into the official recognized legal ownership structure. It's just like the enclosure movement in England and other places, but primarily England, just on a continental scale, right? This is what was happening. Very, very similar structures, and without so many fences. And so it's not like America incidentally came about at a time when capitalism was on the rise, and therefore it was early in the game. The founding of the United States is a byproduct of the rise of capitalism. The founding of the ideals of the American rights that are laid out in the Constitution, and you read the Constitution, are an expression of the rights that were developed of this new kind of man who had these natural rights, who has these inherent capacities, who got to own private property, who got to own themselves. And we just don't remember. We think of what was before that was just blind tyranny, and that's not the case. I mean, there was plenty of tyranny in the world. Don't worry about that. But it was this whole older system of complex web of obligations and duties and shared communal recognition and limitations. And it was this massive, complex, and for us almost incomprehensible series of rights, duties, and obligations that were just being stripped away. And so here comes the United States, founded not at the time, not corollary with, but as a result of and as an expression of these precise forces. This is what's going on. And the third element of this that leads to the exceptionalism of the United States and the expansion of capitalism is there was no countervailing force in the United States. So you had the Native Americans, but we had no tie, but functionally, I mean, this is more complicated, of course, but functionally, what we decided was, as the country decided, look, we have nothing to do with them. We have no obligations to them. There's no history. And so we are free to just take all of this. And so when you're in Europe, when you're anywhere else in the settled, developed world, you have these long histories, you have these long series of negotiated uses, you have communal values, you have these overarching understandings of right and wrong and of use and fair. No, like tabula rasa, right? The great idea of a tabula rasa is, in America, we get to just, and they said this is the language of the time, just start over, to do it new, to make it right, to just be, this is pure. We're not going to be contaminated by all of these old structures, all these old systems, all these old ideas. And so what takes time to evolve and get incorporated, and with all these old systems, the Catholic Church was still a major provider of medical care and of hospice services and, of marriage license and all this, even after the Revolution, right? It took a long time for those structures to go away. They had to be fought out over another 100 years. Meanwhile, in the United States, they just kill the Indians, take the land. Life, there's nobody there to say, hey, no, like we don't develop the land this way because we have this agreement with those people. No, it's like you just do whatever you want. It was really like, it's your land, do whatever you want. Period. Like free, go. And that meant that the constraints, the barriers, the communal histories, all of that were just gone. So the things that slowed the development of capitalism in most of the developed world, civilized world, if you will, China, India, Europe, even though Europe is, of course, the sort of bed of this, just didn't exist in the United States. So it's got this sort of double or triple element here. One, the people who were brought in from this mindset. They're the new people. Two, the structure, the reason it exists and the structure of its founding were just intimately linked to this new capitalist ideal of proprietorship, profit making, and that's the goal. This is what we're here for. And 3, it went in a place where the barriers that the rest of the world were struggling with, for good and ill, to overcome, to institute these new ideas and these new visions of individualities and companies and business and all that, just didn't exist. And so, wow, you're off and running. And so people talk about, oh, it's fertile, you have all the resources, there's, blah, blah. Yes, this is also true, but France is fertile, Germany is fertile, England is fertile, like those countries, Italy, Spain, right? I mean, fertile countries exist in the world. And these other things, oh, it's got 2 oceans. There's plenty. I mean, we hardly didn't use the Pacific Ocean for the longest time, right? You just go on and on and on. You go all these reasons that people say, oh, this is why capitalism took off, or this is the advantages America had. This is the advantage from a capitalist standpoint. The brakes are gone, and the start is from that seed. And so you're like, whoa, this is transformative. And of course, the outcome of that is you get a country that in 1776 sort of vaguely becomes a country, and 100 years later is one of the largest economic powers in the world. And 70 years after that is, has a century run, basically, of being the absolute most dominant economic power the world has ever known. But, we'll get to that. But it's important to see that right from the inception, the American exceptionalism, if you will, in this case, grows from this. And it also, I mentioned this in my Cultural History of the United States lecture, this also explains why America can't have history. Right? What is history except for a linking with values of the past? And part of what the new values said is this kind of individual is enmeshed in free trade. They own themselves. They have obligations to pay taxes and not be a horrible person, but that's about it. Everything else is free trade and integration and all this. Now, how realistic this is in expression, like that's not the question, but this is the argument. And so those bindings of history in the past are specifically supposed to be broken. Like this is what we're trying to get away from. And so you didn't move from wherever you were in Europe or Asia to the United States saying, wow, I want to absolutely continue everything about my home country here. Probably you were like, man, there's a lot I like, there's a lot I don't like, but I'm going to, again, start anew. This was the language. Like this is a chance to make a completely fresh start. And so, boom, once you realize what, the nascence and the growth and birth of capitalism is, a new kind of person, a new kind of legal structure, a new kind of political power in the world, well, sure, the early countries that get this in spades are really going to run with it. Now, that doesn't mean it's necessary, but it really helps explain why the United States took off the way it did and why it's had this form and this sort of, people, it's just, America is all about money and it's all about capitalism and it just does it too much. And, why is it like this all the time? And it's like, well, because that is, it's right there in the inception, right? It's right there at the birth of the company. You can think of it almost as a company, right there at the birth of the country. And so now you move into, 1776, of course, Revolutionary War, 1789, the French Revolutionary War. So one Revolutionary War, small, United States, but becomes hugely important later on. Second Revolutionary War, 1789, huge for rewriting the face of Europe. And one way to read this and one way to understand it, as this is the way people at the time, many of the diplomats and people who are trying to negotiate the treaties, Metternich, Castlereagh, Talleyrand, these kinds of thinkers were like, oh, wow, we really did just erase the old system. The ancien regime is gone. Not just the French ancien regime, but the whole thing. The Austro-Hungarian Empire is gone. The Holy Roman Empire is gone. The Germanic states are going to be completely reorganized. All of the old systems and legal and communal systems that had been taken for granted are gone. And we're going to have to try and build them anew. And this is where you get these parliamentary governments, that's kind of half representational governments. You still get the kings and queens are around, but not in the way they were before the Revolutionary War. And like, wow, they're trying to adjust to all this. And one of the things they're trying to figure out is, how do we incorporate into this new world this new power, which is trade? Like how, because they all just fought a war, and during this war they recognized that, the French, in case you don't know, during the Revolutionary War, the French set up what they called the Continental System, which is they tried to starve England and its allies into submission by not allowing anyone to trade with England. Well, this absolutely messed up everybody's economy, as you can imagine. It didn't help the English economy very much, but it really devastated the continental economy, because it turns out that trade wars, as you know, everything old is new again, are really expensive and dislocate economies once trade systems and all these networks have been developed over time. And you go, oh yeah, well, I ordered tea and I get a ton in from India, and it's delivered into Amsterdam, and then it's shipped across Amsterdam, the Netherlands, to my agents and wherever, and then they transship it across France, and then it goes to all my warehouses, and hey presto, I've got a tea business. And then one day you say, no, you can't do that. We're going to the continental system, and you can't import anything from there. And you're like, wow, wait, I can't get tea from abroad. That's a problem, because we don't grow a lot of tea here, and I got a lot of demand for tea and sugar and rum, and the list goes on and on. Also, we were exporting like lots of cool stuff and making them from glass, and like, oh man, this is gonna suck, and it does suck, and it's really bad for your economy, right? And so once that and that stability of the market's just totally blown up for over, what do you want to call this? For basically 20 years, right? Radical instability and massive trade barriers and trade dislocation and war for 20 years. And so when they came out of this, and again, this all had to be negotiated. So I would love to go into, a 5-hour discussion of these treaties, because I just think it's fascinating. But you actually had these, diplomats sitting in rooms in Council of Vienna, et cetera, just trying to solve all of these and many, many other problems, just going, wow, okay, how do we establish, should we open up free trade? And basically they're like, yes-ish. We absolutely should try and get back to some sort of free trade system. So importantly, they did things like, this is specifically the Congress of Vienna, they set up, free navigation on rivers, right? The major rivers that you can go up and down those, and people can't stop you at every border, and every major city can't stop you and tax you, right? Like you can move stuff up and down the rivers freely. They encouraged states to start lowering barriers between them, and they said, hey, come on, let's start doing lots of bilateral negotiations. So they didn't do like an EU free trade zone. That's going to take a long time to come along. The earliest version of this is probably around 1860s-ish. But they did start saying, hey, we have to address this. That's the point I'm really trying to make, is that this had so clearly become a central focus and central issue that while they're trying to end the Napoleonic Wars, set up a new governing system for the continent, reestablish peace and balance of powers on the concert of nations, as it came to be called, part of this was a very long, careful consideration of how do we adapt to the new economic environment? Because it wasn't just a new political environment, again, closely allied, but this was a new economic environment in which they all recognized, trade is key. We do not want to mess that up. And so already we see, I don't know, again, what's the birth of capitalism? You put a date on it, but you can see by the time you get something like the British East Indies Company, or the Dutch East Indies Company, either of these, 1600, you have this new legal conception, which is being expressed in large, powerful entities, although at this point very rare, that is tied to this new legal conception of the individual, which is starting to express itself both politically and in revolutions. And, continents are being settled under this new models, wars are being fought. And so this is becoming a going concern, to the point where you get the American Revolution, and you get the outcome of the Napoleonic Wars are centrally focused on the kinds of questions that are raised by this. And so that's what happens when you get the expression and the combination of these two forces together. So this is now we're underway, I would say. We've got our two main forces. They're working in concert. They're starting to demand action from all of the major political players in the world continuously. There's no way avoiding this. It's now a war and peace. It's an existential issue now recognized by basically every major government. And they're trying to come to grips with it. And then we'll talk about how this evolves as now we're going to start getting our first truly multinational corporations that start developing in the mid-1800s and really get going by 1900. So, thank you very much.